If the spirit of this age is feminine, and if this age has an increasingly feminine identity, and if society has pinned its hopes on the idea that utopia can be reached through femininity alone and through the destruction and eradication of masculinity, then it's not going to work. Incidentally, I just read a quote from the famous director James Cameron, where he talked about testosterone being a poison. He said, "A lot of things I did earlier I wouldn't do career-wise, and just risks that you would take as a wild testosterone poisoned young man. I always think of testosterone as a toxin that you have to slowly work out of your system." However, again, this idea that the feminine is going to save the world and that the masculine must be destroyed and eradicated because it's a poison, it's a toxin, it's evil and it's bad, that is not going to create utopia. In fact, all it's doing is creating a brand new set of problems. In the accompanying book to this series, I go into a bit more detail, but here all I'm going to say is that cancel culture, virtue signaling, lived experience, this idea that subjective experience matters more than objective fact, these are all consequences of this ideology. But the problem that I really want to focus on here is what has become known as safetyism, because I think this in particular has profound consequences for our society. In psychology, neuroticism is described as one of the big 5 personality traits, and it's the degree to which a person experiences the world as distressing, threatening, and unsafe. Each individual can be positioned somewhere on this personality dimension between extreme poles, perfect emotional stability versus complete emotional chaos. Now, as our graphic perhaps indicates, women as a whole tend to score far more highly in this trait of neuroticism than men do, which means that women are more emotionally unstable, they tend to fluctuate emotionally more than men, but also they perceive the world as being more distressing, threatening, and unsafe than men do. This means that women can sometimes overestimate danger, seeing it where it doesn't really exist. They can worry more and catastrophize more. And on the other hand, men can sometimes underestimate danger, not seeing it where it perhaps does actually exist. This also has an effect on how men and women approach risk as well. Women, because they perceive more danger in life, are more risk averse, whereas men are far more risk tolerant. I'm reminded of this old meme, which might help us visualize what we're talking about here. The father here is not worried about something going wrong. He doesn't anticipate it would be particularly catastrophic even if it did, and he thinks the fun is worth it at the end of the day. He has low levels of neuroticism, so he is risk tolerant. The mother, on the other hand, has an entirely different perception of what's going on here. She worries far more that something will go wrong, she anticipates far more pain if it does, and she doesn't consider the activity itself to be worth the risk. In fact, she's panicking when the dad does this. You may have experienced this in your own life as well, males urging risk and females urging caution. I still have vivid childhood memories of my dad playing wrestling games with us, or throwing us in the air at the swimming pool, or taking the stabilizers off my bike and pushing me along before I felt ready. I also remember being quite small and my great uncle kicking a football full blast at my face and making my nose bleed. And by the same token, whenever I was doing anything even remotely energetic as a child, I remember my grandma panicking and telling me I was going to break my neck. Everything was a potential neck breaker to my grandma. Anything even remotely energetic, I was going to break my neck. Now, this tendency to overestimate danger actually has many advantages for women. For example, women statistically are safer drivers than men because they're more cautious. With a heightened sense of peril, they drive on average 12% more slowly than men, meaning they need to hard brake 11% less than men. They're more likely to abide by traffic laws as well because they're more worried that a policeman will see them and they'll run afoul of the law. They also take extra care with safety measures like seatbelts. A 2020 study by Injury Prevention looked at 14,425 road fatalities between 2005 to 2015, and they discovered that male car drivers had twice the rate of fatalities per mile driven compared to women during that period. Male motorcyclists had 12 times the rate of fatalities compared to women at that time too. So being extra cautious actually has a lot of advantages. Now, because we're moving from a masculine to a feminine age, we are moving from being a risk tolerant to a risk averse age. And again, at first, that's kind of brought some advantages. As we reached a point around the middle here, there were some advantages. We reached a good balance, you could say, with the advent of seatbelts, airbags, child car seats, childproofing in the home, safety caps added to toxic cleaning products, stair gates, health and safety rules at work. Injuries and deaths at home and in the workplace actually plummeted during the second half of the 20th century. From 1960 to 1990, for example, there was a 48% reduction in injuries, accidents, and deaths amongst 5 to 14-year-olds. But as we're now moving deeper into the left trench in the 21st century, a healthy balanced caution has gradually given way to an anxiety, a neurosis, a complete risk aversion, a complete zero tolerance attitude towards all kinds of risk. Have you ever noticed in the aftermath of tragic accidents these days, like someone drowning in a lake, for example, it's become really common to hear politicians on the news saying things like, "We must make sure that accidents like this can never happen again," or "We must make sure families never experience this kind of grief ever again." In other words, we must eradicate all risk from swimming in lakes. Now that makes a really good soundbite for the news, but not only is it completely unfeasible to eliminate all risk from life, but the effort to do so usually translates into we must impose more laws, more regulations, more monitoring, controls, restrictions, or even complete bans on what people can do, which is why we've seen a rise of the nanny state in the postmodern age, whereby the government starts treating citizens as if they were toddlers. This neurotic sensibility that has zero tolerance for all risk, complete risk aversion, has become a backdoor through which more authoritarianism has been imposed upon us. It's a tyranny exercised for our own good. I've just been on a train to England at the weekend, and an announcement kept repeating on the tannoy saying that CCTV was monitoring us for our own safety, which kind of reminded me of this scene from iRobot.
Move now, I'm going to service.
Please remain indoors. This is for your own protection.
Now, we all know about health and safety gone mad, this ridiculously over-the-top emphasis on caution, this zero-tolerance approach to all kinds of risk. This is such a feature of our age. But because we're an age increasingly focused on feelings, we're extending the idea beyond physical safety to include emotional safety as well. We now believe people should be protected not only from all physical pain, but from all emotional and mental pain as well. This is why we have the invention of trigger warnings and safe spaces. Trigger warnings are the idea that before you say anything uncomfortable, you should warn people so they have a chance to leave the room and thus protect their emotional well-being. Safe spaces were first introduced at Brown University in Rhode Island. There was a debate on campus about rape, and if students felt emotionally distressed by that, they could go to this room equipped with cookies, colouring books, bubbles, Play-Doh, calming music, blankets and pillows, and a video of frolicking puppies. The 21st century has seen this rise of this idea that people should not be exposed to anything that they might find mentally challenging or emotionally uncomfortable. In The Coddling of the American Mind by Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt, they call this extreme neuroticism safetyism. And it's simply the idea that safety should be prioritized above all other concerns and considerations. Safety is the most important thing in life, and there should be a zero tolerance approach to all forms of risk, whether that be physical, mental, or emotional. So what is wrong with safetyism? Why shouldn't we try to eliminate all forms of risk from life? Isn't it always better to be safe than sorry? That's what the proverb says, always better to be safe than sorry. Well, no, as it happens, that's not true. You see, the problem of being overly cautious and too risk averse is that it stunts growth and development, it promotes anxiety, and sometimes it even creates the very problems that people are trying to prevent. Haidt and Lukianoff use the example of peanut allergies to make this point. You see, up until the 1990s, peanut allergies were very rare amongst American children. One study found that only 4 in 1,000 kids under the age of 8 had any such problem. By 2008, however, that number had more than tripled. 14 out of 1,000 children now had a peanut allergy. Now, nobody knew why children were becoming more allergic, but in response to some scare stories in the news, many parents and schools decided it would be best to ban peanuts altogether, even if the chance of dying was very, very small, 4 in 1,000, even if it was minuscule. It's better not to take any risks here, better to be safe than sorry. And what's the harm in playing it safe? So no peanuts allowed in school, a complete zero tolerance approach to risk. However, A later study found that it was exactly because parents and teachers had started overprotecting children from peanuts back in the 1990s that allergies had started rising. That was the cause of the rise. Learning about peanut allergy found in 2015 that if a child is exposed to peanuts from infancy, their body learns to recognize and adapt to it. However, if the child is kept away from peanuts throughout childhood, when they are inevitably exposed to them later in life, the body doesn't recognize them, perceives them as a threat, and that's what triggers an over-exaggerated allergic response. The researchers at LEAP studied 640 infants who they believed were at high risk of peanut intolerance due to the fact they already had eczema or some other kind of allergy. They told half the parents of these babies to follow a safety-first approach and to keep their child away from peanuts at all costs. The other half were given a supply of snacks made from peanut butter, and they were told to give their child some 3 times a week. The researchers then followed all the families carefully, and when the babies turned 5 years old, they were tested for an allergic reaction to peanuts. The results of this test were very clear. Among the children who had apparently been kept safe from peanuts, 17% had developed an allergy. Among the children who had been exposed to the peanuts, only 3% had developed an allergy. One researcher said, for decades, allergists have been recommending that young infants avoid consuming allergenic foods such as peanuts to prevent food allergies. Our findings suggest this advice was incorrect and may have contributed to the rise in peanut and other food allergies. Our immune systems learn from experiences, particularly challenging experiences, and if it doesn't have those experiences, it can't adapt and it can't grow strong. Indeed, our immune system actively requires exposure to a range of foods, bacteria, viruses, and even parasitic worms, because that's how it learns what those things are and develops a strong response. Vaccines typically work by the same logic as well. Instead of trying to keep children away from viruses altogether, which is simply impossible, scientists discovered that if you inject a little bit of that virus into the body in a controlled manner, it will learn what that is and learn how to destroy it, meaning that in the future, the virus will cease to pose any serious threat. There's a whole hypothesis around this called the hygiene hypothesis, and it basically notes that the more wealthy and clean a country gets, the more allergy rates tend to rise. Developmental psychologist Alison Gopnik explains that there's a real lesson to be learned here in how we raise our children. She says, thanks to hygiene, antibiotics, and too little outdoor play, children don't get exposed to microbes as they once did. This may lead them to develop immune systems that overreact to substances that aren't actually threatening, causing allergies. She continues, in the same way, by shielding children from every possible risk, we may lead them to overreact with exaggerated fear to situations that aren't risky at all and isolate them from the adult skills that they will one day have to master. Now we're getting to the hub of the problem of safetyism. In the same way our immune system needs exposure to stressors to adapt, learn, and grow strong, human beings as a whole need exposure to physical, emotional, and mental stressors so that we adapt and learn and grow strong. If we are overprotected from stressors in life, we become weaker, and then we tend to overreact with exaggerated fear to situations that aren't actually risky at all. So in short, overprotection leads to anxiety, fear, and even more neuroticism. I mean, do you want to have strong physical muscles? Then you don't protect those muscles from stress, you actively go looking for stress. You lift weights, you run, you swim, you go to the gym. It's stressful on your muscles, but it's by that pain that your body grows strong and learns how to adapt to the real life challenges that you're gonna have to face. If you hide from physical stressors, however, your muscles weaken, your joints lose their range of motion, your cardio function declines, you may develop chronic health problems, which means you'll find it harder to tackle real life situations, walking upstairs, catching the bus, running to catch the bus. That's a picture of what we're doing when we try to overprotect people emotionally and mentally. If you want to raise a robust human being with character, you don't shield them from life, you don't shield them from emotional and mental stressors, but instead you embrace them. Schools and universities are supposed to be mental gyms where you are exposed to a wide range of ideas that challenge and confront and make you uncomfortable. This is how you learn, adapt, and grow strong. And if students don't get this at school, and if they are overprotected from challenging ideas through trigger warnings and safe spaces, then as Gopnik says, they will later tend to overreact with exaggerated fear to situations that aren't risky at all and will be isolated from the adult skills that they will one day have to master. Very clearly, by prioritizing safety above everything, we are creating an overly neurotic generation that is incapable of handling real life and that overreacts to perceived danger when there is none. That in turn is causing a rise in anxiety and depression in this generation because people begin to see the whole world as this overwhelming danger against which they have no agency. In 2012, Professor of Risk Engineering at New York University, Nassim Nicholas Taleb, coined the term anti-fragile to describe human beings. He said the world is composed broadly of three things: the fragile, the resilient, and the anti-fragile. Fragile things, of course, are those that break easily and cannot heal themselves, like china teacups. If you drop one, it smashes into bits and it can't be put back together. It is fragile. Resilient things are those that can withstand a beating, but it still deteriorates over time. Think of a toddler's juice cup. It's made of thick plastic, so it can handle being bashed around and dropped on the floor. However, it doesn't benefit from that either. It will start looking the worse for wear eventually, but it is resilient though. And then finally, you've got anti-fragile things. These are things that require stressors and challenges to grow strong. Our immune systems are anti-fragile, our muscles are anti-fragile, and we ourselves are to a large extent anti-fragile. Taleb says just as spending a month in bed leads to muscle atrophy, complex systems are weakened, even killed, when deprived of stressors. Much of our modern structured world has been harming us with top-down policies and contraptions which do precisely this, an insult to the anti-fragility of systems. This is the tragedy of modernity. As with neurotically overprotective parents, those trying to help are often hurting us the most. And do you know what solves this problem? Do you know what solves the problem of neurotically overprotective parenting? It is masculinity. It's risk-tolerant, even risk-loving fathers. When my dad took the stabilizers off my bike and pushed me along, I had no choice but to start pedaling. I learned to ride a bike that day. I adapted. I grew in confidence as I overcame that challenge. I realized I could do it. I could ride a bike. I grew that day. When he threw me in the air in the pool and I splashed down, that's how I learned to swim. I adapted and I grew stronger as I overcame that challenge. When I got that football off my face, I learned from it to be more nimble and to be more quick and aware of my surroundings. I adapted, I learned, I grew. This is one of the blessings that masculine fathers bestow upon their children. These kind of little pushes outward into the world that cause them to grow in character and confidence. These little pushes towards stressors, if you like. And it's no coincidence that as we are shunning masculinity and as fatherlessness becomes an epidemic in our society, it's reckoned that about a quarter of kids now are growing up without a father. It's no coincidence that as we see this, we're also seeing a corresponding rise in anxiety, depression, and perpetual infantilization, people who just can't handle life. Both femininity and masculinity bestow blessings upon children. And this is one of the reasons why a family with one father and one mother is always optimal and why any variation is suboptimal. It's always preferable to have the unique blessings that come from a father and a mother. But since one side is so denigrated these days, it's especially important to say that masculinity is not toxic, and in fact we need the risk-tolerant, even risk-loving nature of masculine men to help raise healthy, happy, confident, strong human beings. It's just not the case that this side is all good and this side is all poisonous and bad and evil and toxic. And if we don't rebalance by bringing respect back to this side, our whole civilization will continue to suffer.